Hi, everyone. So I'm Lindsey Keeney. I'm the Conservation Director here at the Illinois Environmental Council. We also have Eliot Clay next to me, our Ag and Water Programs Director, and Jen Walling, our Executive Director, is also on. And she'll be giving the bulk of this because I think it's one of her favorite things to talk about is how you guys can get involved and helping clear up. These are the questions that we get, I think, the most out of a lot of our work is what exactly can we do and how can we get involved and what's legal and what is allowed and what's not. So we're excited to share all of this with you. A little bit about the Illinois Environmental Council. We have our mission statement on here, which is our old mission statement, which is that we're the eyes, ears, and voice of the environmental community in Springfield. But we have a new one that we're working on that is more about how IEC is building in Illinois where informed decision makers successfully champion the environment. So we're looking forward to rolling that out. And so the Illinois Environmental Council, a lot of you guys are familiar with us. I think we sent this invitation out to our legislative listserv, and then we're involved in Vital Lands, so we know a lot of you, your organizations from Vital Lands as well. But we do a lot of things are centered around representing you here in Springfield. We work to build relationships with legislators, and that's our relationships, as well as we work to build relationships with our affiliates and their legislators, our legislators and their constituents that are involved in these issues, conservation, sustainable ag, all of these things that we work on. We also provide regular updates and in-depth analysis on the bills and how they're moving here in Springfield. We track up to 250 bills a year that impact the environment. I know that's one thing that I'm always harping on is we don't just write bills and run bills. We're also keeping track of bad bills that are out there and working to stop them from becoming law. We are an affiliate-based organization, so many of you are affiliates. We coordinate over 80 different environmental organizations around these issues and represent them here in Springfield. And then our other big thing that we do is we release an environmental scorecard for the state legislators that scores them on how they voted on environmental issues and on our bills each year. So we are going to do a couple quick survey questions for you inside Zoom. So you'll get a little pop-up that says, that asks the same question and you can fill it out. So our first question is, what is your favorite conservation victory at the state level? It's kind of an easy question because we want to see maybe what you're most excited about that we've worked on in the past. So you'll see that screen pop up. It's got the Natural Area Stewardship Act, IDNR funding, recreation liability protections, the Wrongful Tree Cutting Act, rewrite, protecting OSLAD and NAAF funding. And then there's another box. So you can choose there and hit submit.
And if you've got another, you can put it into the chat.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and we'll maybe yell those out as they come in. And then do you want to wait on the results for this one?
Now people are voting. We've almost got where they're coming in now. I'm going to give it. All right, get your results in, and we just want to get a sense of where folks are. So I'm going to end the poll and show the results.
Oh, cool. Okay. Oh, IDNR funding. Jen, can you see this?
I can.
Yeah. So it looks like IDNR funding was a big one. Cool. And that's something we continue to advocate for every single year.
And all the others seem to be fairly close, so we're proud of a lot of these efforts.
Good, good. And nobody had any extra others. So then we have another question, which kind of will help orient us with our audience here, is how much state level lobbying does your organization already do? And you can check a couple boxes here. Whether you're a registered lobbyist and you actively lobby, whether you participate in a grassroots lobby day, and that could be ours, that could be lots of organizations put together grassroots lobby days. We send out legislative action alerts to our members. We talk with our local lawmakers but are not registered to lobby. Our lawmakers have been out to visit a natural site with our organization. I hope a lot of you guys check that one. If not, get a hold of us and we'll make sure you can check that box next time. We're a member of IEC. They lobby on our behalf. Our organization does not allow lobbying of any kind, and we are interested in doing more. So I'll let you guys click through there.
More than one of these will apply to you.
Yeah, so you can click more than one, click all of them that apply.
Will everybody vote?
Okay. Get your final vote in. Hit submit. And let's see where we're at here.
Oh, okay. Let's look
Cool.
through these. So lots of you participate in grassroots lobby days. Lots of you send out legislative action alerts. A good chunk, more than I think I thought, have a registered lobbyist. All right. Not as many have had a legislator out, so we hope to increase that one. About half of you are IEC members, and a good chunk of you are interested in doing more advocacy. Jen, is there anything else you want to pull out of this?
That's great.
Okay.
It's know that there are not too many of you that are not allowed to do any lobbying, but we'll talk about that and like what you should think about.
Great.
All right, so then I'm going to turn it over to Jen, the lobbying expert, to walk you through what exactly you can and can't do.
Sure. So today we're going to cover a little bit of what nonprofits can and can't do, some best practice lobbying and lobbyist registration. And then we'll go through just some very brief best practices in Springfield. But just know we do a whole civics for environmentalist training that's usually in January of each year. And we really like go in depth at that about how Springfield works. And so just keep in mind, we have a whole 2-hour presentation. So we're really going to do some basics today. So the first question that I'm asked by a lot of different land trusts and other organizations is, whether advocacy or lobbying is prohibited if you are a 501c3 organization. And just for folks, a 501c3 is the charitable designation under the IRS, and it's charitable with tax deduction. IEC has both a 501c3 and a 501c4, and we actually code most of our lobbying, I think almost all of our lobbying, to our 501c4. And I'm going to go through what these are here, but a 501c4 can do any advocacy, but it's different in that you cannot deduct any contributions to a 501c4 from your taxes, but you still are a tax-exempt organization. So we have both, and that's why we can do so much lobbying, but we do keep it separate between the two organizations. So if you are a 501c3 nonprofit, this is lobbying as you can. And like I said up here, I am not your lawyer. So if you have specific legal questions, this is not legal advice that I'm giving you. I'm just going to do my best to explain it. And, you guys can always check back with me and talk to your own attorney. So yes, you are allowed to lobby your legislators, any legislators, as a 501c3 nonprofit. Can you go back to the previous one? As a 501c3 organization, you can lobby. And so there's 2 different tests under the IRS. One of them is the insubstantial part test. And this is, a lot of you, especially land trusts, are going to be doing this, that if you're spending less than 5% of your organization's activities on lobbying, you really don't have to do anything. You don't have to report this on your 990s. We're going to talk about the H election in a second. You're fine. It's called the insubstantial part. And 5% is, it's something that is designated in a particular court case. So it's not like strict law that's in IRS code. But if you're just doing 1 bill a year, if you just do 1 lawmaker visit a year, you're not going to meet anything more than the insubstantial part test. So that's the first part. And then the 501H election is if you're an organization that does a little bit more lobbying, you can do up to 20% overall lobbying, of which only 25% of that can be grassroots lobbying. And this is, it's your organization's resources, however you're defining that, like if it's 20% of staff time, 20% of your overall budget, et cetera. And if you do anything more than 5%, you need to take this H election. So you need to put it onto your 990s and say that you spent this amount on lobbying. And I'll talk about record keeping in a second. So there's direct lobbying and grassroots lobbying defined by the IRS. Direct lobbying is any communication with a lawmaker that expresses a specific view about legislation. I'm going to go into this more in a second. And grassroots lobbying is a communication with the general public that expresses a view about a specific issue, includes a call to action, but it doesn't go directly to the lawmaker. Let's go to the next slide. So this is, I talked about here, charities using the insubstantial part test have to report how the charity lobbied and report expenditures. So you have to keep records of it. What we do at IEC, although we have that C4, we have a different column in our timesheet where we track what is lobbying, and that's how we keep track of what we're doing. So Andrew asked about preparing a fact sheet for lawmakers. Actually, I'm going to get to what lobbying is in a second. Charities using the insubstantial part test have to keep a detailed description. We do that just in terms of what we're lobbying on and what it is. So let's go to this next slide, actually. I think it has more here. Okay, so this is really important, and it's going to be different when we talk about the state level. Lobbying has to contain it needs to contain three elements to be considered lobbying by the IRS. One is a specific view, two is a piece of legislation, and three is either a call to action to the general public or a communication with a lawmaker. I think I have a slide about these in a second, but it has to contain those three pieces. So just for Andrew's question, if you are working on a fact sheet and it has a specific view, oppose or support a specific piece of legislation, like say SB 9, and there's a call to action. I think the word support may be that call to action in that particular area. If it meets those three things, it's a resource that you're doing that would be considered lobbying. But for example, if any of these elements are missing, it's not lobbying. So if you are just doing a fact sheet about coal ash, even if it goes to lawmakers, if there's no bill associated with it, it's not lobbying. You do have to be careful if you're educating about a specific topic and there is an ongoing piece of legislation, could be lobbying, but most likely it's not going to be. So it has to, like I said, be you have to be expressing what your view is. You support, you oppose, you want this voted down, you want it amended. It has to be a specific piece of legislation, and you have to be asking a lawmaker or the public to do something about it. Vote yes, vote no, etc. You can, for example, you could put together a fact sheet in a way that says, Prairie Reverse Network is opposed to, SB 13. And if you don't have anything in it that's a call to action, that really doesn't meet the lobbying test. Like if you're not, call your lawmakers to tell them to vote on this bill, that sort of thing. But a lot of this, these small actions like this, there's a lot of it that can be kind of fuzzy, and like the odds that you're going to be gone after for something that's sort of a small action are really low. But like I said, be careful. These are the three pieces that are considered lobbying under the state level. I have more on in a second, so let's go here. So this is an example of communications that are not lobbying. So if you are educating, doing an educational communication, and you don't mention a specific piece of legislation, so if you are asking your lawmaker to take action on plastic pollution, but there's no bill, that's not lobbying. That's just an educational communication. Or if you're communicating to the general public about a specific legislation and it doesn't express a call to action, so you don't ask them to contact their lawmaker, or you don't ask them to do anything about it, Generally, rulemaking and referenda are also not considered. Can you go back? Generally, those are also not considered lobbying. And often, so foundations really fund lobbying activities. There are foundations that fund referenda. There are foundations that are fund work on referenda or fund work on rulemaking activities, because those generally are not considered lobbying. But foundations don't fund lobbying. However, some of these items that we say here that are not lobbying, educating lawmakers or educating the general public, is something that's fully fundable. Let's go to the next slide here. So here's where we're going to talk about the state of Illinois and lobbying at the state of Illinois. So actually, can you go to the next slide really quick, and then we'll go back. Okay, so in Illinois, whether you have to register or not as a lobbyist has a much broader definition than what we just talked about with lobbying. In Illinois, you're not just required to register if you're lobbying, you're required to register if you're influencing. And this is the very broad definition of influencing. And so, like there's a, I should have cited the statute here, and I can direct you all to, actually, I think it's on the previous slide. We'll go back there in a second. But any communication, action, reportable expenditure, which I'll talk about on the previous one, or other means used to promote, support, affect, modify, oppose, or delay any executive, legislative, or administrative action, or to promote goodwill with officials is defined. So that is influencing. This is a much broader definition than lobbying. I'm going to talk about why, for most of you, this really doesn't matter, but it is something that you should think about, because a lot of activities you may be involved in would fall under this broader category of influencing and not lobbying. So let's go to the previous slide. So registering as a lobbyist with the state of Illinois is important, and it's expensive, but it's also not a huge deal, especially if you compare it to like Chicago or Cook County or other lobbyist registration reporting. So here's a few examples of things that you do that are specifically exempt from being a lobbyist. So if you bring people on a specific lobby day, grassroots lobbying events are specifically listed as not being, you don't need to register people under the Illinois Administrative Code. The citation is there. So if you're doing a grassroots event and it's limited to the participation in the event, you don't have to register. If you're only coming down as an expert witness testifying in committee, there's another exemption for folks who are expert witnesses testifying in committee. Also, persons or entities that receive no compensation other than reimbursement for expenses up to $500 per year don't have to register. So there is that $500. There is some, in terms of what that means, it's no compensation other than reimbursement for expenses of up to $500 a year. So if you're paying an employee a salary for doing lobbying work, you may be giving them compensation, in which case, if they're engaged in influencing elected officials, you may need to register them. And then registration costs $300 per organization and $300 for each individual each year. And I say all of this in that you should be careful in all of this. And IEC has 4 people on our staff that are registered as lobbyists that may in some way talk to lawmakers in a way that's not educational. And so those folks are registered as lobbyists, and there is reporting. We have to report expenditures. So basically in Illinois, anytime you give any lawmaker an item, if you're a lobbyist, you have to report it. So if you give them lunch, if you, when we take lawmakers on canoeing, we have to report that. So you just report it, and it's made public. People can see how much you spent on it. So there are some specific guidelines for reporting expenditures, basically of any kind. And in Illinois, there's no longer a minimum for expenditures on what you spend on a lawmaker. But that's another thing that is really hard to enforce, because if I went and got a lawmaker a cup of coffee, and they like maybe paid me back later, or maybe they got me a cup of coffee, like those are items that are just not going to be enforced. And so I would say, like, for the vast majority of you, if you are doing educational work with lawmakers, you're just not going to be somebody that needs to register. But if you're getting to the point where you are asking them, lobbying them on specific pieces of legislation, especially lobbying beyond your own lawmakers, you may need to be somebody that needs to register on behalf of your organization. But as I said, you shouldn't worry about just pure educational activities you're participating in. Is there a question in there? Okay. Site visits where money babysit on gas, canoe rental, etc. So it's only if you like specifically give that lawmaker a thing. So like if you are taking a lawmaker in a canoe and part of it was an expense towards them being in the canoe, and you paid for it, you're going to have to report it. If it was just like you're taking them out to your site, you have canoes there, you're not paying for it, that's not a thing that you have to report. It has to have a specific monetary value. And I can point you to more citations, Andrew, in the code there. But like if you drive out to a visit, just the overall items that you're spending on putting together an event, you don't have to report, but you do have to report anything that is an expenditure to the lawmaker. It's kind of how we do gifts. So that's where you would have to need to report. You don't need to report your expenses on yourself and getting there and that sort of stuff. Yeah, go ahead. Let's go to the next slide. Actually, go two ahead because we did this one. I'm going to do a couple more and then I'll take some questions. And we'll do some specific items, but I think since I took a while on that, we're going to cut out some other slides. All right, so here are some things, you know, we really recommend building relationships with elected officials, whether they're state elected officials or they're city elected officials, et cetera. It's really important to build them. And here are some of the reasons why you might. So elected officials are folks that can help you spread awareness of the work of your organization. They have good email lists, they're well connected, they have great relationships and strong networks that they may be able to plug you in to assist with your work. Or you know, maybe you're looking for more people to visit your site. Maybe you're looking for people to be aware of your site. They can help you with that. They can also help you build trust and credibility depending on who the lawmaker is. And then other items, problem solving or funding, you definitely want to build a relationship with an elected official before you ever want anything. If you're going into an elected official and the first thing you're doing is asking for something, asking for money, asking for this, it's going to be taken a lot less seriously. You don't have that relationship in that background. They don't know that they can trust you. They don't know who you are. So build that relationship up before you ever interact with a lawmaker. And then you may become a trusted source of information for decision makers someday, which is really important. I love it when a lawmaker goes to me and they go, I gotta call Barbara from Sierra Club before I can take a view on that. And of course, like I know Barbara from Sierra Club, who they're calling, and they may be a grassroots volunteer, and I like that they're locally based like that. So you may be the person that they call when they want to know about a land trust or conservation issue. Go to the next slide. And here's some other non-lobbying ideas to work with your elected official: adding them to your newsletter list, inviting them to any events they have, you attending their events, inviting them on a tour or a site visit, or giving them district-specific information that you work on. Next slide. And this is really important for everybody. Look up who your lawmaker is. And so this is the link that is on ILGAgov. It's a big ugly link. This is me with my state representative, Kelly Cassidy. And you should make sure you look up who your state lawmaker is for each of the sites you have and where your office is located. And if you're saying a congressman, it is probably not, you should know your state elected official. So if you think your state senator is Dick Durbin, you need to take a closer look because he's your US senator. So making sure you have, all of your elected officials, and there's the iView item that can help you like find elected officials, find out where your land is and what legislative district they're in if you're having any issues. So I took a way long time on that, but I think that's what you guys were mostly interested in. So what if I take a few questions here, and then we should probably just skim through a little bit on the legislative process before we get to some case studies. So any questions on that first part? That people want to write in the chat box? For IRS reporting, we're required to track hours spent on lobbying. Do I count travel time? I don't know. That is a good question. We count travel time. So we count the time that we spend traveling to Springfield, Colleen and I, as lobbying. So, I mean, to be careful, I think you would want to track everything that is in there. But like, if you're going out to a site and you just run into a lawmaker and you talk to them, that's probably not something that you needed to track. But if you're doing it specifically, if we're doing these events, well, actually, a lot of the land trust tours and that sort of stuff that we're doing right now, we don't count as lobbying because, the IRS reporting, it's lobbying, not influencing. So when we do these canoe tours and that sort of stuff, we're not counting them. But if we had like a lobby with a lawmaker about a bill, we count travel time. So it just depends on what it is. So yes, and iView is an excellent tool here. And I will, just because I'm looking at this weird photo in the background, I want you guys to know, even though this is my state rep, this is the day we passed the bill protecting cougars, bears, and wolves. And we made some cupcakes about cougars. So that's what that's about. So any other quick questions here?
If you want to ask verbally, you can just unmute yourself and speak instead if you don't have access to the chat.
Oh yeah. Anybody other questions?
Oh yeah, if there's anyone on the phone that asks questions.
I didn't go over draft bill language. So drafting a bill is not lobbying. If you're putting together a policy or researching it, that is not. But the second that you ask a lawmaker to carry that bill and move it forward, that would be lobbying. So, and I think there's a gray line about negotiations because many negotiations happen without a single lawmaker in the room, and you're also not necessarily influencing the negotiator. So there are some attorneys that I work with that are much smarter than I am that get involved in negotiations and are not registered and don't feel that they have to register because they're there as an expert witness. They're not really there to be influencing a lawmaker on something. So, so yeah, I would say like if you're drafting bill language, if you're coming up with policy, that is not lobbying. But the second that you go and ask a lawmaker to carry it, to introduce it, to take an action with it, you're going to be lobbying. So don't worry about that. You also have any questions? Cool. Eliot, you want to run through these next few slides on how the process works? And then we'll do some case studies.
Yeah, that sounds great. Everybody, Eliot Clay here, Agricultural Water Programs Director. A little bit of background on my end. I started with IEC back in December, and prior to that, I was in the working in the state Senate for 4 years on the Republican staff, doing agriculture and environmental stuff. So I am pretty well versed in this whole process of basically how a bill becomes a law. So this is going to be my bill on Capitol Hill spiel that you heard in Schoolhouse Rock all those years ago. But it's pretty true to form for the most part. So in this slide right here, process summarized, here's basically how it goes. Once we've got a bill drafted, we've got a senator or a House member that wants to introduce it, we start in either the House or the Senate chamber, and the bill is introduced. And then basically from there, it will get assigned to a committee. Now, generally, since a lot of the folks that we're talking to in this are like land trusts and that kind of thing, a lot of the times it'll go to like the Senate, for example, it'll go to the Environment and Conservation Committee or the Agriculture Committee. And from there, it gets voted on by the members of that committee. And if it advances, it goes to the floor. And from there, it goes through different reading phases. We don't need to get into the big specifics on that. But essentially, let's say it started in the Senate, went through committee, comes back into the Senate, and that's when it goes up for a full vote in front of all of the senators. And if it passes there, then it will go across the building to the other side. In this case, it would go from the Senate to the House. From there, it goes through a very, very similar process. It gets assigned to a committee. It'll get passed out of that committee and then go back to the full House for a vote. Can you move this video? Sorry, I'm moving something so I can see the other. Okay, there we go. Yeah, and then it goes to the whole thing for a vote. From there, there's a couple different things that can happen. If it was a perfect world, what would happen is that the House would pass it, and then it would go to the governor, and it would be signed into law. Now, that is almost a rarity because very often there are going to be amendments drafted for bills to clean up language or fix things that might have not been caught when the bill was originally introduced. So let's say we passed a bill from the Senate to the House. In the House, if there is an amendment that they want to file and they adopt the amendment in the House, what happens is the bill does not then go to the governor. It's got to go back to the Senate and be approved by the Senate for the House's addition to the language, because they want to be consensus on both sides of the both chambers. From there, if they accept the concurrence, it will then go to the governor to be signed. If they reject the concurrence, it'll go back to the House, and they'll have to deliberate, or they'll either come up with a new amendment that the Senate can accept, or the bill might die. This is generally how it goes with a lot of bills. Generally, we'll introduce a bunch of stuff at the beginning of the year in one chamber, it'll go to the other chamber, and then come back towards the end of the year. And yeah, that's generally how it goes. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. This is the big, old, real way that it usually happens. There, obviously, you can see in this, and I encourage everybody to look at this a little bit more detailed once we get off here, because this is pretty detailed. But there are obviously, I've seen every time you think you've got it nailed down about how a scenario is going to go with a bill, you will see something new. And I feel like I've seen something new every single year. Bills that we think are dead get life brought back into them. Just wild things can happen. So I encourage everybody to look at this. And obviously, if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Jen or anybody else on our staff who's knowledgeable about the process, because once you get into the weeds on this, it can get weird quick. So definitely, if you have questions, let us know. Next slide. Yeah, and then here we are back on the ILGAgov page. This is the home page that you would see. We also call this ILGA, so if I say ILGA instead of ILGA, that's what I'm referring to, just the good vernacular kind of stuff. But here's the basics of the pages that you'll see. You've got the Senate side and the House side. Members of both chambers will be listed when you click the members pages. You can then sort those members by either the party that they belong to, the district, and that kind of thing to help you search a little bit better. And then the schedules tabs will be things like the daily schedules, what committees are meeting, and then also usually at the beginning of the year they'll put out like a 5-month schedule to show you what is going on through May, what days they're in session. Also, I know many of you are not in Springfield, maybe you're traveling, something like that, but you want to hear or see a committee or a floor vote, you can click on the audio video tabs in either the House or Senate and listen into committees, which can be very helpful, because if you're traveling or something like that, but you need to keep informed about when a vote is happening or specific debate that's going on, that's a really good way to know in real time what's happening. Yeah, just an internet connection and all that stuff. And you can do it from your phone too. It's actually pretty convenient. Next, this is just further down on that same page. This is a really important part too. On the left side, you see that GA dashboard, that red text. That is where your organization can go to file a witness slip. This is super important when bills are up in committee, because the witness slips are going to inform the legislators where an organization is on a bill. For example, if I want to slip in support for environmental counsel on a bill, I would go to the GA dashboard, find the committee that the bill is in, click on the bill, and fill out a witness slip stating that Illinois Environmental Council is in favor of this bill. It's being filed by me. It'll give my title. And this is a really good way of informing senators and representatives what exactly your organization is, how they are on a bill. So yeah, keep that in mind. Rules and regulations is an important one too. Administrative rules, obviously with DNR, just as an example, there are a lot of administrative rules that are not in legislative statute. Basically, the legislature will pass a bill and then the DNR will come up with the rules to implement that bill. And then you'll find that in the administrative rules on the bottom left. On the right side, looking up previous bills is very, very important a lot of the times because we want to see past language that's been introduced, see how statute has changed over time. And you can do that by looking at previous General Assemblies. Once you click that tab, it'll give you a drop-down menu of General Assemblies going back to, I want to say, either the 70s or early 80s, something like that. Unfortunately, once you go back far enough, that's when you get really, you have to start actually getting into books to look at some of the old language that was introduced. But they've got it going pretty far back, which is helpful. And then, yeah, and then legislator lookup, that's what we looked at a while ago. That's definitely a useful tool just to find out who is representing you, and you can be better informed about what's going on in your district. And then somebody had kind of talked about this a little while ago about drafting a bill. Let's say that you've got language for something that you want to show somebody, but you want it drafted in bill form. So this is like, you can write it out in a Word document, but you can't just give that to a lawmaker and they can just hand it to somebody and then it's a bill. What you need to do is go to what they call the Legislative Reference Bureau. This is a group in the Capitol building that is basically comprised of just a bunch, like dozens of lawyers. Their job is to take language that people give them and put it into the correct formatting to be filed as a bill. When you do this, you don't want to just bring language. You want to figure out where in statute your language would go. So for example, if you want to do something involving wildlife, more often than not, it would be like in the Illinois Wildlife Code. And when you do that, you're going to want to find the statute number, that fun stuff. It makes their lives a lot easier. And I'll just tell you right now, the people at the Legislative Reference Bureau have probably one of the craziest, busiest jobs in the Capitol, and you want them to like you. You want to be as helpful to them as possible when you get something drafted. If you can give them as much great info as you can at the front end when you're getting something drafted, you're going to make their lives a lot easier. The turnaround time is going to be a lot faster for getting your bills back. And ultimately, you'll build a good relationship with them, which is very, very helpful if you're going to keep pestering them for amendments and stuff, which you're inevitably going to do.
And also, as members, IEC is a good resource for helping draft language.
Yep. So if you ever have any questions about, you know, once you get into statute, like where you find the right numbers, all that kind of fun stuff, feel free to ask us so we can always help. Jen and myself and Colleen have been buried in statute for a long time, so we know where stuff's at.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I would just say we kind of included this stuff in here because we want you to start thinking now if there are some things that you would want to change and you want to write a law on. Most of you are not going to be registered lobbyists that can do it, and we're happy to do it for you. Reach out, we'll help find a sponsor, we'll help write it, etc. Just getting you the idea of how this stuff actually gets written, and knowing that you can reach out to IEC to have us help.
Cool. Yeah, and that last slide we were just on, that was kind of, I actually just already covered that. It's basically just LRB, and then kind of what the effective date is. I mean, that's going to depend on bill to bill. We don't really need to get into specifics on that. But yeah, obviously, if you guys have any other questions, let us know in the chat or feel free to reach out to us afterwards.
And then Jen, are you going to go into these case studies?
Let me go through a couple and then we'll take 10 minutes of questions. I'll end with you guys with the tours. I don't think we'll get into the rest of it. So we're making that one. I just have a bunch of case studies of conservation things that we'll like burn through here that the conservation community has been really involved in over the last decade. Our favorite one that won that poll there is IDNR funding, which is really important. And I want to point out one of the items here was this was a bill you can see on the fourth line here, the bill lost 3321 because it got called after midnight on June 1st. And May 31st is the deadline for bills to pass that are enacted in that calendar year. And if they pass before May 31st, you only need a majority. If you pass after May 31st, you need a supermajority. And items happened that our bill got called after midnight on May 31st. So it needed a supermajority and lost, but later on came for a vote and passed and was signed by the governor. So just some demonstration there. So just in the next slide, I would just also say legislation can take a really long time. So several of you from Open Lands and other organizations, Clifftop, were involved very deeply in this recreation liability bill, which was supposedly an accident that outdoor recreation was taken away from the item about being exempt from liability, despite every other state in the nation having that as a liability exemption. So it took 7 years. And one of the other items, you really want to be careful in choosing your sponsor, and that's something that IEC can really help you with. And we know the reputation of different lawmakers. We know more about how they're going to work. Are they workhorses, or they expect you to do it all? Are they well liked, or are they not? Are they very smart and can pick stuff up, or are they going to have a hard time with really technical bills? Like, we're aware of all lawmakers and how they can handle it. And of course, the lawmaker here, Senator Don Harmon, very powerful, very smart, very well connected, and was able to help us take this past the finish line after 7 years. So that was that value. We'll skip to the next one here. Next slide. Another, we worked very heavily with Prairie State Conservation Coalition about the Natural Areas Stewardship Act. And the Natural Areas Stewardship Act, I would just say, I know PSCC tried to go through that on their own, and they were running into some frustrations with getting it introduced, getting a right sponsor and all of that. This is the slide before, Lindsey. And so, they were able to reach out, Fran, to IEC, and we were able to help get the bill written and help with the tricky parts, even though they had a really good idea. And similar, the next slide, we are really welcome members bringing us issues, and I'll talk a little longer on this one. I often say that I shouldn't say that IEC, you guys, our members, the people out in the field are doing the real work. Like, you're out there clearing invasive species, putting up trails, purchasing property, and having actual physical representation of the awesome work that you're doing. And we write a lot of words. And so for us, one of the ways we work with our affiliates is that you all do your work and you run into obstacles and you work around those obstacles that are there all the time, whether it's not enough funding or issues where you're not being treated fairly with your conservation properties, et cetera. You just deal with them and you do your work. I encourage you guys to reach out to us because we can see if there's ways to help remove some of those obstacles. So, for example, Natural Lands Institute had an issue with tree cutting on one of its properties where it went to court and was unfairly compensated for the trees that were cut. And so it took a few years. So once again, patience. And there was some issues that we had with legislative leadership not wanting to move the bill. But in the end, we were able to get it to move forward. So that was really exciting, and it's on its way. So yeah, that's wrongful tree cutting. We'll skip to another one. And then conservation easements, that's something that we did this year. And I would just say in the conservation field, the realtors and the Farm Bureau are our two biggest opponents. So any work that you're doing locally to work with the Farm Bureau or realtors in your county or community is going to be helpful to us. So a little bit about conservation easements got done because those groups were cool with the changes we wanted to make. But we're going to end with Lindsey and Eliot covering these, and then there's a couple more questions, and I'll take any other ones. So start writing your questions in the chat, and Lindsey and Eliot are going to give you some thoughts on what we can do next.
Yeah, so as you guys think of questions, put them over there in the chat. And while we build a list, Eliot and I will talk a little bit about our favorite thing to do, which is our conservation tours and sustainable agriculture tours. We run this program. It's a program now. We've been doing it for years, where we take legislators out of their office and get them out onto the conservation properties, the sustainable ag farms in their district, and try to make them champions of the issues that you guys are facing out there in the field. Our goal a lot of times is, there's a couple goals there, but number one, we want to build those relationships with legislators, and we want to build them with you, their constituents. So we just recently, you see that picture there, we just recently visited Nigrin Wetland Preserve with NLI. And something that we kind of hammered home there was if a bill comes across a legislator's desk, we hope that they reach out to us, or they reach out to those land trust owners in their district that they know, or those conservation professionals that we've introduced them to weigh in on those. And if you have hosted them, if you've had them out to your properties, that's going to make that phone call a little more natural. They're going to think about you as an expert when they're wondering how to weigh in on these things that come across their desk. Another thing that I know I love educating lawmakers about is we use a lot of terminology in both conservation and sustainable ag. We'll throw out things like cover crops or filter strips or prairie. And it's odd to think, because they're common terms in our world, but it's odd to think these legislators have no idea. And so when they read those things in a bill, they don't always grasp those concepts. But when you can say, oh, you know, when we had you out at Steve's farm, or when we had you out at Nigrin, remember we saw this specific practice or this specific issue or problem, it makes that connection for them and makes them become advocates of your legislation or your bill that you're working. So with all of that said, that's why we do it. Is there anyone who has great ideas? Where should we bring your legislators or your lawmakers? Is there a place you want to show off, an issue you want to discuss with your legislator? Eliot and I are happy to reach out to those decision makers, set up those tours, get it on their calendars, on their schedules, tell them that this is an important thing that they should make time for and get out to, and then we'll come out and see your cool properties and facilitate those conversations with legislators and you, their constituents.
And you can put those in the chat. Just type those into the chat at any time. To write
questions here. Let me take. I think we're not going to pursue the rest because we only have 10 minutes. We have a bunch left, so please. Where's a good place to take your lawmaker? Andrew had asked a question earlier, is filing a witness slip or asking the public to file a witness slip lobbying? Eliot, do you just want to really quick click through the witness slip slides just so people know what a witness slip is? So this is the General Assembly dashboard, and you would go on here, you'd log in, next slide, you'd find your committee, next slide, you'd find the committee, you'd find the bill, and then you would fill this out. And keep it on the slide for a second. So yes, I think filing a witness slip is lobbying because it has all of the elements of you're asking, like, this is a way you're contacting lawmakers. There's a specific legislation for sure, and you're actually you're expressing a view about the legislation. And when you're sending it to the grassroots, you're asking them to do a call to action. I would say that is almost for sure lobbying. And I would ask that you be careful too, when we tell people to fill out witness slips, under the representation portion, we make clear to people that if they fill out representation, they should put self or NA under representation unless they're qualified and able to speak on behalf of that organization. Because I think, even though I haven't seen this done, if there's ever an issue where it said that somebody's supposed to be registered and they're not, one of the things they'll probably look at is if people filled out a witness slip on behalf of an organization that they represented them. And so we're very careful to tell people that if people want to express their affiliation, you put it under the firm, business, or agency that is up above. But with the representation, I, as an attorney, look at that and say, that could be used as evidence that you weren't registered and that you were representing a particular organization in a lobbying capacity, even if you weren't. And so if you're qualified to represent the organization, put it there, otherwise not. So that was the point I wanted to make, but you'll see here, Eliot will go to the next slide, Lindsey. You put your position in, etc. And we have some stuff on testimony, but that is it. So with 7 minutes left, please also put in where we should take your lawmaker, with sites, and then any questions you have. We are doing, IEC is doing a webinar on the Chicago registration in August. If you want to participate, if you're an IEC member, you got notice, but you're doing it August 29th in person and webinar, so join us for that. Is there anybody else have any questions? You can either unmute yourself or you can type in the chat box.
Yes, if nobody else is going to pipe in with a question, I came in a little bit late, so I hope I'm not duplicating something. This is Bill Kale from Geneva, Illinois. I was just curious, is there a list of the farms in Illinois that have been, other people have suggested already? Are you still trying to build that list, or do we have one available that we might, on our own case, travel? I don't know if there's anything available in Kane County for any of my legislators, but I might learn from others. And the farm issues are just getting to be a more prominent thing, understanding farming, agroecology, all of the rest of that.
Sure. So, I mean, we've taken lawmakers out to the Bruner Forest Preserve, where Barrington Hills Natural Farm is, which is in Kane County. But yeah, I mean, we usually work with the Stewardship Alliance or other organizations to point out farms that might be doing sustainable stuff, or mostly for this, when we're talking about like land trusts and visiting open space sites. Yes, that's an example. There's not a list. This is not a like public thing. This is just something that we will take a lawmaker to a private farm to learn more about sustainability. We often work with soil and water conservation districts, etc. So thanks for the question. Cool. Anybody else have questions? Slides. You're recording this, right, Todd?
Yes, this is recorded.
Cool. And so it'll be available.
Yeah, we'll put it up on the Vital Lands Illinois YouTube channel, and I'll send an email out to everyone with a link to that.
Do you want to, maybe if just people are typing questions or don't have any, do you want to keep scrolling through here real quick?
Yeah.
You had some advice on offering testimony. If you're ever offered to come down to testify in a committee, which I may ask you if you're a subject matter expert. I don't know. Some advice on developing relationships with lawmakers. Scroll in here. One more. So if you are in Springfield, come by the new IEC office. We got some new plants out front. We're getting solar panels. But come by, relax, wear comfy shoes in the Capitol. Those marble floors are killer. So, and then I think, let's get to the last slide. Oh, we have a lobby day on energy, October 29th. And there will be buses from all over the state. And here's all of our contact info if you need it. So anybody, any last questions or concerns or, et cetera? There's the evaluation. Anything else anybody has questions about? Well,
I want to urge you to please fill out the evaluation. There's a link in the chat. It'll take you 30 seconds. It's 2 quick questions. and that'll help us to to make our sessions useful and helpful. Thank you. And thank you to Lindsey, Eliot, and Jen for a great session, and we really appreciate your time. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you all.
Bye.